The gospel today is the third of 5 in a row on the bread theme. Jesus as the true bread, the bread from heaven. I have no idea how many sermons I preached on these bread passages. I'm not going there today. Somehow I was led to an alternate first Old Testament reading, the one from Samuel that you heard from 2 Samuel. And this is one that speaks to us about grief. This is where we encounter King David grieving the death of his son Absalom. Now, we all experience grief at many times and in various ways in our life. Grief is a person's spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical reaction to loss, whatever that loss might be. And it can something that can begin before the loss actually is experienced. And then it continues until that grief reaction is no longer noticed. Granger Westberg was a Lutheran pastor, a holistic health pioneer, who insisted many years ago that seminaries provide clinical training in their programs. And 50 years ago, he wrote a book titled Good Grief, which has helped millions of people, millions of readers, including NFL players and a former First Lady, find comfort and rediscover hope after loss. The book is still in print, and it's the bestseller of our Augsburg publishing house. Well, that book and my clinical training are valuable assets in my ministry. Now, if you read the comics in the newspaper, which I do usually before I read the news, I want to start with the good stuff first. You know about Charlie Brown. Well, he isn't anywhere near being the king of the playground. He's awkward. Nothing ever really seems to go right for him, ever. And good grief is his favorite way of expressing that he's bummed out by whatever it is. Charlie Brown says, "Social awkwardness is my superpower." Well, there can be times when we express good grief in regard to the frustrations that we experience in life. In our text today comes the cry of grief from King David. David, who was the shepherd boy called to shepherd his people Israel. And he's remembered as Israel's greatest king. He's the author of about 70 of our Psalms. Jesus is identified as coming from the line of David. Well, bear with me on a little history here. Now, David lusted after Bathsheba, beautiful Bathsheba, got her pregnant, had her husband Uriah killed. God confronted him through the prophet Nathan about his sins. David repented. But God predicted that David's family would suffer because of his mistakes. And often the mistakes of parents are reflected in the lives of their children. We see that biblically, we see that in our world today. For example, those who are abusers often come from abused situations. So David's heart is broken as he realizes that God's predictions are coming true. First, there was David's beautiful daughter, Tamar. She was raped by her stepbrother, Amnon. And then David's son, Absalom, had Amnon murdered. In verse 31 of our text, David mourned many days for his son Amnon. Well, then his son Absalom stirs up a rebellion against his own father. And we're told that Absalom was the most handsome man, a perfect specimen of a man. And he cut his hair only once a year and that was because it got too heavy. The Bible even points out to us that his hair weighed 5 pounds. Well, during a battle with King David's army, he flees. He runs away, tries to get away, but his mule went under the branches of a huge oak tree. His hair got caught in the branches, and he's left hanging there. And then he is killed there. When David heard about the death of his son Absalom, he was overcome with emotion. Now, he had ordered that Absalom be kept safe. He went to his room and he burst into tears. Some of his psalms express his grief. Now, people in the helping professions know that a person's grief can be short or it can be long, can be mild or it can be very disruptive, can be mental or physical. You've all experienced grief in one way or another. Well, it could be maybe a favorite piece of clothing is worn out. You can't wear it anymore. Or you've moved away from friends, a spouse, a parent, or a child, or a close relative or a friend, or a pet has died. And maybe you felt panic or depression or despair, sadness or nostalgia, anger or something else. And we think of the people in our area who are suffering loss from the fires and the horrible things that are happening in that way. Well, maybe we experience foggy thinking, or maybe we even end up with no emotions at all. Sometimes the way we react and try to handle things. But we're all in the same boat, really. We all experience grief. Jesus himself experienced it a number of times. Now, there's the death of his friend Lazarus, which led Jesus to tears. He grieved over cities and people because they refused to believe in what he said and did. And there was certainly grief with Judas's betrayal, with Peter's denial. There's certainly grief for Jesus with our own sinfulness as we turn away from him and go our own way. In Isaiah chapter 53, we read, "The Messiah is despised, rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with bitter grief." The Gospel of Mark, the 14th chapter, we read of Jesus' agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." In Romans chapter 9, the Apostle Paul expresses sorrow and grief for my people. And in the book of James, the 4th chapter, he says, "Don't be afraid to express deep, heartfelt sorrow." So here we have some lessons, some ideas on how to meet and deal with grief that can become good grief. One way we can do that is by admitting it, by expressing it, by telling people how we are feeling. Well, sometimes we try to hide it. We don't want to depress other people. We're afraid if we share those kind of things, it's going to turn them off, it's going to turn them away. Or we're afraid it's going to show weakness on our part. We don't want to be weak in the eyes of others. Or our pride gets in the way. We want to handle things ourselves. We want to have that kind of strength, or show that kind of strength. In Shakespeare's play, Macbeth, one of the characters, Macduff, has learned that his wife and children have been murdered. And a friend of his by the name of Malcolm advises him, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'er-fraught heart and bids it break." If we keep grief inside, it can show itself in physical illness, in other harmful ways. It's important to get it out to express it, to admit it. Another way to deal with grief is to remember. I had a friend express it this way: make sure your memory policy premium is paid up. At memorial services, I always encourage family and friends to share stories and memories, helpful steps in the healing process, helpful steps in moving from grief to good grief. Ivana and I recall fondly a dear neighboring pastor by the name of Carl Wenger. He was a great pastor, a wonderful friend, loved by everyone. He served his entire pastoral ministry of 49 years in a small rural parish not far from where we were in Storm Lake, Iowa. Well, he suffered a heart attack and was brought to the hospital, which was just across the street from where we lived. And they tried to revive him. We were happy that they were not able to do that, because he often talked about allowing people the dignity of dying. And he was ready to die. So after he died, we invited the family over to our house. And we laughed and we cried as we shared stories and memories of Carl Wenger. We have many stories we'd love to share with you about Carl. That'll have to come at another time and another place. But when we left, after the family left, one of Carl's sons said, "Thanks so much for the party. It was good grief, good grief." A busybody woman in a small town met the town lawyer on the main street. She tried to find out some things about the town's richest man who had just died. "You knew him well," she cooed. "How much wealth did he leave?" Well, the old lawyer tipped his hat and answered, "All of it, madam, all of it." Well, our loved ones leave behind their goods, but even more, they leave behind their memories, their example, their actions. And we need to reflect with thanks on what their lives have meant to us in our journey of life. And another way we deal with grief is by response, responding. When we experience grief, we find ourselves in a position where we can help others with their grief. We can share how grief has affected us, and we can relate to where they are in their grief. So we can assist them in the grieving process, in the healing process. We're hesitant a lot of times, aren't we? We don't know what to say. We're afraid we're going to come with the wrong words. Well, words aren't what really matters the most at a time like that, but just a matter of being there. Being there and showing that we care. Being there to listen and to support, to listen to where they are and what's going on with them. And please don't say it's God's will. No, God's will is that we have life and that we have it in all of its fullness. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the author of a groundbreaking book on death and dying, where she first presented the model of the 5 stages of grief. There was denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And there's no timetable for how we move from one stage of grief to another. It's possible to quickly pass through a stage. It's also possible to get stuck in a stage. But these stages of grief can be our stations of the cross as we might move through the valley of the shadow of death and find that healing process for ourselves and for others. Now, there's so much more that can be said about how we deal with and handle grief. But I want to conclude with one of David's more than 70 psalms, Psalm number 6. where David writes, O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your rage. Have compassion on me, Lord, for I am weak. Heal me, Lord, for my body is in agony. I am sick at heart. How long, O Lord, until you restore me? Return, O Lord, and rescue me. Save me because of your unfailing love. For in death, who remembers you? Who can praise you from the grave? I am worn out from sobbing. Every night tears drench my bed. My pillow is wet from weeping. My vision is blurred by grief. My eyes are worn out because of all my enemies. And then he concludes, the Lord has heard my plea. The Lord will answer my prayers. Amen.
Thanks for watching. I hope this video can further the discussion of your relationship with Christ, either at home or maybe in the comments below.